He was the perfect son until I tried to join a book club. My name is Celeste Marwood. I spent the first half of my life teaching literature, and the second half living in what I thought was peace, after my husband died and my son moved in to take care of me. What a comforting thought that was in the beginning. You might actually regret missing out on this dramatic story. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. I raised Gregory on stories, Shakespeare, Dickinson, Austen. I used to believe words had the power to save us. But I never realized how easily they could be used to twist, to gaslight, to isolate. Or how the most dangerous thing in the world could wear a smile and call you mom. Everyone said I was lucky. You have such a good son, they'd gush. Gregory brought in groceries, paid bills scheduled, my appointments, checked my medications. He'd even reply to texts on my phone because the screen was too small. I laughed along with them. Yes, he's such a blessing. I believed it. At least I wanted to. But that belief began to crack the day I tried to join a book club. It started so innocently. A flyer in the community center, reading between the wines. I like the play on words. I missed conversations that weren't about blood pressure or whether the bananas were ripe enough. I wanted laughter. Other voices' stories that weren't mine. When I brought it up over tea, Gregory's spoon froze mid-stir. A book club? He asked lightly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. With strangers. Not strangers. Just neighbors. A few women I met after yoga last week. Mom, he said gently, you know how overwhelmed you get in groups. Last time you had a headache for 3 days after brunch with Aunt Jean. And didn't you forget your purse there? I blinked. I didn't remember forgetting my purse. But maybe I had. I'll drive you if you really want to go, he added, sighing. Just promise me you'll take your pills before. The last thing we need is an episode. An episode. The word hung in the air like a threat. I stayed home that night. Told myself I wasn't feeling well. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe he was right. Gregory always seemed right. That's what made everything so difficult. But the next morning I received a text. Sorry we didn't see you last night. Hope you're okay. We saved a chair for you. Mary from the book club. Confused, I asked Gregory if anyone had called. He shook his head. Must have been a mistake, he said. Maybe they had the wrong number. But that chair saved for me. That heart emoji, that didn't feel like a mistake. The world didn't end, of course. But something shifted. A doubt that had been planted months, maybe years ago, finally cracked open. You see, the life I lived wasn't horrible. There was no shouting. No slamming of doors. No bruises to show the neighbors. Gregory was sweet in the way a velvet rope is soft until it tightens around your throat. He decided when I went to bed. It's better for your sleep schedule. He monitored my caffeine. Remember what the doctor said. He answered calls from old friends. You were napping. He laughed about how forgetful I was. So often it stopped being a joke. And I laughed too, because the alternative was terrifying. After the book club incident, I started to test the limits. Subtle things. I moved my keys to a different drawer just to see if they'd disappear. I signed up for a mailing list under a different name. I left a voicemail for my cousin and asked her to text me instead of calling. Little things. Private things. Gregory found out about all of them. My God, Mom, he said once, holding up the brochure I'd hidden under my pillow. Are you trying to give yourself another stroke? I've never had a stroke. But that didn't stop the nurse at the pharmacy from asking if I'd recovered. I asked her where she heard that. She said, your son mentioned it when he was picking up your new blood pressure meds. I don't take blood pressure meds. Not until he started putting them in the pill organizer. By then, I was beginning to feel like I was losing pieces of myself, not all at once, but slowly, like water draining from a cup. You didn't know, had a hole in it. I'd sit in the living room, sunlight falling across the hardwood floor, watching Gregory hum as he washed the dishes. So loving, so attentive. And yet, I had to ask for permission to leave the house. When my neighbor Mary invited me to another book club meeting the following week, I told her I'd try. She leaned in and whispered, we miss you. I hope everything's okay. And that's when I knew. People could see it. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't declining. Something was wrong. That night, I began writing things down, just in case I forgot. Or just in case he made me forget. Everything I had was ours, but nothing was mine. The first time I noticed my bank card missing, Gregory was quick to explain. "Oh, I have it," he said casually while pouring almond milk into his cereal. "You left it on the counter again. I figured I'd hold on to it so you don't lose it next time." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I had no memory of leaving it anywhere. But that didn't seem to matter anymore. He handed it back later that day, just as casually as he'd taken it. But the message was already there. "I can take anything I want from you and make it feel like your fault." I didn't even ask about the phone bill when it came in, triple the usual amount, or why the Wi-Fi password had been changed, or why my Kindle suddenly required a parental code. "My God, Mom." He'd sigh like I was a child. "You're so bad with tech." "I'll fix it. Don't stress yourself." He always fixed things after he'd broken them. I started thinking about the word ours. That's how he always framed it. It's our schedule, our home, our finances. But I couldn't remember the last time anything had actually been mine. My calendar had his handwriting on it. My doctor's appointments were booked by him. My groceries were ordered through his apps, and every shared account had only one email address on it, his. I tried resetting a password one evening just to access my own medical records. The verification code went to Gregory's phone. When I asked him why he didn't even blink, "I set it up that way for convenience," he said. "You wouldn't want to get confused with all the codes and messages." I smiled, nodded, said thank you, then went upstairs and cried quietly into a pillow. I used to be a professor. I wrote dissertations on Sylvia Plath. I taught students to read meaning behind the text, to question the speaker, to challenge the narrator. How had I let myself become the character in a story I would have warned my students about? I remembered something from Plath's journals. "I talk to God, but the sky is empty." That was what it felt like now, shouting into silence. A long hallway filled with closed doors and my own echo. The hallway of my home. I walked into the guest bedroom one day just to feel like I was allowed somewhere he hadn't claimed. But even there I saw his folded sweaters stacked in the closet, his spare charger, a fitness band, a book with his name on the cover flap. Every room in this house used to carry memories of my life with my husband, our wedding china, my music box collection, photographs of our anniversary trips. Slowly, almost unnoticeably, those objects had vanished, packed, donated, or simply reorganized. I found my wedding photo in the garage one day, face down in a cardboard box labeled junk. That night, I confronted Gregory. He tilted his head like I was a fragile vase. "Mom, you're going through a sentimental phase. I read that can happen in aging." Then he reached for my hand. "You can trust me. I'll always take care of you." And that's when it clicked. This wasn't care. This wasn't love. This was control, refined, invisible, polite control. The kind no one believes until it's far too late. I decided to test something. The next day I told Gregory I wanted to use the car, just to get some yarn from the craft store. He hesitated. "Why don't I drive you?" "No," I said, "I want to go alone. I need to get out." He smiled like a therapist in a bad movie. "You're feeling anxious again, huh?" I kept smiling. "Maybe, but I'd still like to drive." "Well," he sighed, "the tank's empty. I was going to take it in for servicing anyway." I nodded. "Okay." An hour later, I checked the gas gauge. Full. Tires fine. Oil changed. He hadn't wanted to say no. He just wanted me to believe I shouldn't go. That night, I pretended to be asleep on the couch. I heard him on the phone in the kitchen, voice low. "No, she's getting worse. Said she wanted to drive somewhere today. It's like she doesn't understand what she can and can't do anymore." Silence. Then, "Yeah, I might talk to Dr. Henson about early-stage evaluations. If she agrees, maybe we can start setting up some legal structure. Power of attorney or something." My stomach dropped. Power of attorney. He wasn't just isolating me. He was building a case. A case that I was fading, that I was unreliable, that I couldn't be trusted with my own life. The next morning, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had lost 10 pounds of fear and gained 2 ounces of rage. It wasn't much, but it was something. I sat down at my desk and opened the leather-bound journal I hadn't touched in years. The one my husband gave me on our 40th anniversary. The one with the tiny gold clasp. On the first page I wrote, "He is stealing me slowly." Then I dated it. I would write in that journal every day. I would record, remember, resist. And when the time came, I would reclaim myself. He said I was forgetting things, but I remember everything. There's a particular kind of cruelty in being told you're losing your mind when in fact someone is actively working to make you question it. It started small, a misplaced necklace. A light left on that I knew I had turned off. A teacup I found in the microwave instead of the cupboard. At first I blamed age. I even made jokes about it. Oh, just Celeste being forgetful again. But there was something hollow in Gregory's laugh when he'd echo me, something rehearsed. He started saying things like, "You already told me that, Mom," or "Don't you remember? We talked about this yesterday." And I'd search my memory in panic only to find nothing. No echoes, no fragments, no details. I stopped trusting myself. Then came the key incident. I kept a small silver key to a lockbox where I stored personal letters, my will, and old photographs. I wore it on a chain around my neck tucked under my blouse. I never took it off. One morning, it was gone. I turned over every drawer, every pocket, even the laundry hamper. Nothing. I was so frantic that I was shaking when Gregory walked in. "Looking for something?" He asked, casual as ever. "My key," I said. "The silver one? It's gone." He raised an eyebrow. "Mom, you haven't worn that key in weeks. You must have lost it before laundry day." "That's not true. I wore it yesterday. I touched it before my bath." He smiled gently, stepping closer. "You're tired. You've been so forgetful lately. Maybe you dreamed it." I didn't say a word. But that night, I tore apart the house while he was at the gym. I found the key in the back of his desk drawer, along with a copy of my will I hadn't seen in 5 years. He'd told the lawyer I'd approve the updates, that I had requested them, that everything in the event of my cognitive decline was to go directly to him. I took the key and put it back around my neck, and I began to remember everything. From that moment, I paid attention like a scholar preparing for the final exam of her life. I noted what time he left the house, what he unplugged, who he called, what he said about me, especially when he thought I wasn't listening. He'd talk to people on speakerphone just out of my view, then call into the living room. "Hey, Mom, remember when you burned the rice last week and nearly started a fire?" I never burned rice. We hadn't even eaten rice that week. But he was rehearsing his narrative, crafting it, layer by layer, brick by invisible brick. The worst part, people believed him. Even my niece Natalie, sharp as a tack, always a skeptic, called to ask if I was okay. "You just seem, I don't know, different lately," she said. "Gregory said you've been sleeping a lot and missing appointments." "I haven't missed anything," I replied, careful not to let my voice shake. "And I feel fine." She hesitated, then said, "Okay, just checking." I could hear it in her tone. She didn't believe me. Or maybe she just didn't know who to believe. That night, I wrote in my journal, "He's not erasing me. He's replacing me." But the final straw came when my phone began acting up. Notifications stopped appearing. Emails vanished. Texts sent by friends didn't come through. "I upgraded your settings," Gregory explained. "It's supposed to reduce distractions." Distractions. That's what he called human connection now. I bought a second phone the next day and hid it in a hollowed-out copy of Jane Eyre. I charged it at the library. I synced it to a separate email, and that's where I contacted a support group I'd found online. They specialized in emotional abuse of elderly parents. I felt foolish writing my first message, like maybe I was overreacting. But the moderator replied within 2 hours. Her words were gentle and validating. "Everything you're describing is abuse. You are not crazy. You are not alone." That night, I cried not from fear but from relief. I wasn't losing my mind. I was fighting to hold on to it. So I bought a small audio recorder, one that looked like a flash drive, and I began to record our conversations. At first, I told myself it was for clarity, proof just in case. But really, it was for sanity. To hear myself speak and know I wasn't imagining this slow, quiet war. I kept the device in my cardigan pocket. When Gregory asked how my day was, I smiled sweetly and said, "Lovely." I cleaned out the pantry. He didn't know I had also recorded him telling me I'd never had a pantry to begin with. I started capturing things, little moments that to an outsider sounded like care, but when played back in sequence sounded like possession. "You don't need to call her." I told her, "You're too tired." "No, you didn't like that show. You told me last week you found it boring. You were always forgetful, even when I was a kid. Even when I was a kid. The irony didn't escape me. He was rewriting my entire history to suit his version of now. But I remembered everything. And soon everyone else would too. The house got quieter as my friends disappeared. Silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's tactical. My house hadn't always been quiet. When my husband was alive, we had people in and out all the time. Nieces dropping by, neighbors waving in for tea, friends from the university coming over to discuss books life and which one of us had aged the most gracefully. But now, it was still muted. And not just because of age, because Gregory made it that way. At first I thought maybe people had simply drifted. I'd retired, stopped hosting, slowed down. That's natural, right? But the pattern was there. The visits didn't just decrease, they vanished. Phone calls that used to be regular dried up. Emails went unanswered. Birthday wishes turned into silence. And every time I asked Gregory about it, he had an answer. Oh, you didn't hear? Martha moved to Florida. Aunt Jean's been really sick, best not to bother her. Susan tried calling but said the line was always busy. You really should learn to use voicemail. The line was never busy. I checked. The voicemail worked fine, but it was easier to believe him than to sit in the growing loneliness and ask, what if I'm being deliberately left behind? One afternoon, I walked to the mailbox and found a postcard buried in a pile of coupon ads. Celeste, I miss our tea talks. Please call when you can. Martha, not Florida, not unreachable. Just wondering where I had gone. I called her. Twice. Voicemail. So I wrote her a letter. Handwritten. Short, warm, open. A week later, she came to visit. I was elated and nervous. Gregory was at work. I brewed tea, set out cookies, and sat with my oldest friend on the patio like we used to. We talked about books. Our husband's silly students' aches and pains. And then I asked, why did you stop visiting? Martha looked down into her tea. Gregory told us you didn't want visitors. My breath caught. What? He said you were too tired, overwhelmed. That you didn't recognize people sometimes. I didn't want to intrude. The words hit like stones to the chest. Recognize people, I whispered. She looked up. He said you had moments where you'd forget conversations. That you got confused easily. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My mouth went dry. He was so gentle about it, Martha added, still not meeting my eyes. He sounded sad. Of course he did, I thought. That's the story. That's the stagecraft. I wanted to scream, but I smiled instead. I'm glad you came anyway. When she left, I went upstairs and sat on my bed staring out the window. It wasn't that I had been forgotten. It was that I had been removed, erased quietly, lovingly, as if for my own good. The next day, I checked my phone's call log. It had only 2 weeks of history. I hadn't noticed that before. I checked my voicemail settings, half were disabled. I called my provider and found a new setting had been placed on my number to block unverified numbers. When I asked Gregory, he shrugged. You kept getting scam calls, he said. I stared at him. And all my friends are scams now. He smiled. Of course not, Mom. Don't be dramatic. But it was dramatic. Because it meant something terrifying. My world had been redesigned without my consent. That night, I went to the bookshelf and pulled down my wedding album. It was gone. In its place, one of Gregory's self-help books about caregiving for dementia patients. I stared at it for a long time. Then I took a photo, and I wrote in my journal, the friends didn't vanish. He made them invisible. I didn't forget. He made sure no one remembered me. I began writing letters again. Actual letters. I mailed 5 that week to friends, cousins, even a former student who once said I reminded her of her own mother. And slowly responses came. Most said the same thing. Gregory told us you weren't feeling well. Gregory said you didn't want company. Gregory mentioned you were slipping. The language of decline. The perfect veil. I was a professor. I knew how words could shape perception. How a subtle shift from tired to slipping changed a person from a bit off to unreliable. And when people believe you're unreliable, they stop trusting you even when you speak the truth. That's when I knew I needed evidence. Not just my words. Proof. Dates. Recordings. Messages. I already had the audio recorder. Now I needed allies. I contacted the support group again, asked if they'd ever dealt with isolation tactics like this. The reply came swiftly. Yes. It's common. They isolate to rewrite the narrative. It's how narcissists maintain control. You're not imagining this. I sat in the kitchen that night, tea in hand, looking around the house I once filled with laughter. Now I filled it with memory. Hard copy, written, stored. And I made a plan. If he was going to erase me from the world, then I would write myself back in. He took me to the doctor and answered all the questions for me. There are moments when you feel your soul being pushed to the edge of a cliff and you're not even allowed to speak. My appointment with Dr. Henson had been scheduled without my knowledge. Gregory told me the night before, "We're going to check up on your memory, just to rule things out." I froze in the hallway, hand still on the staircase railing. Rule things out. He smiled. You've been repeating stories a lot, leaving things on the stove, getting dates mixed up. You told me you wanted to be proactive about your health. I never said that. But I had learned the futility of arguing when the script had already been written. So I nodded and I went, because I wanted to see how far he'd go. Dr. Henson's office was painted a pale, sterile blue, the kind of color that tries to calm you down before telling you something you won't like. When we sat down, Gregory pulled his chair close to mine. Too close, like I needed a chaperone. I felt like a child at a parent-teacher conference, but I smiled politely. Doctor, Henson opened her tablet. So Celeste, how have you been feeling lately? Before I could answer, Gregory jumped in. She's been sleeping a lot, forgetting small things like where she puts her glasses or whether she's eaten. And she's been a bit withdrawn, less social. My lips parted slightly. I hadn't said anything yet, and I watched as the doctor nodded and typed. Celeste, would you say that's accurate? She asked, eyes briefly flicking up. I held her gaze. I remember where my glasses are. They're in my cardigan pocket. Gregory laughed. Now they are. I put them there on the way in. I clenched my jaw. No, I did. Doctor. Henson looked between us, trying to assess tone, trying to judge credibility. That was the game. Gregory knew it. He didn't need to convince me. He just needed to cast enough doubt to shift the balance of belief. The doctor turned back to me. Do you find yourself repeating conversations or forgetting recent events? I keep a journal, I replied calmly. I write everything down. That's excellent. May I ask to see it? Gregory's eyes twitched. I paused. It's private. Her smile remained professional. Of course. She then handed me a short cognitive test, a sheet of paper with simple tasks. Draw a clock name. Objects. Remember 3 words. I did well. I knew I did. But Gregory interrupted mid-task to say, sometimes she gets overwhelmed by these. Should we pause if she seems anxious? I wasn't anxious. I was enraged. When we left the office, Gregory patted my back like I was a patient recovering from a long illness. You did great, he said in the car. Doctor, Henson is going to keep an eye on things. She's concerned about your executive function. 8. Executive function. I'd taught students with actual impairments in that area. I'd written recommendation letters for doctoral candidates who struggled with cognitive fatigue. But now, because my son said so, I was being labeled quietly steered toward legal incompetence, one doctor's visit at a time. The next morning, I received an email copied to Gregory from Dr. Henson's office. Following yesterday's visit, we will begin monitoring for early signs of cognitive decline. It may be prudent to start discussing long-term care planning. Long-term care planning. I printed the email and folded it into my journal. Later that day, Gregory brought me tea, chamomile lightly sweetened. I took a sip and asked, "What's in this?" He blinked. "The usual." I watched his eyes. It wasn't poison. He wasn't that overt. But I started taking inventory of everything. Pills, dosage, expiration dates. I created a chart, photographed the bottles, logged times. Because now I understood this wasn't about keeping me safe. This was about preparing the case. For control, for my assets, for the final step, guardianship. He had already replaced my lawyer's number with his own on the fridge. That afternoon, I called my old estate attorney, Marjorie Lane, from my hidden phone. Celeste. She answered after 3 rings. I thought you moved. I didn't. I said, why did you think that? Your son called 6 months ago. Said you were relocating and wouldn't need legal representation anymore. My voice turned ice. Did I sound like I moved? She paused. No, you sound more focused than I've ever heard you. I told her everything. She listened in silence. When I finished, she said, keep records. Don't confront him yet. Let him continue believing you're compliant. He's not building a case. You are. That night, I walked into the kitchen while Gregory was watching a show. I stood behind him for a moment, holding the recorder in my cardigan. He turned. Need something, Mom? I smiled. Just checking if I left the kettle on. He chuckled. See? Always forgetting. I smiled wider. Yes, I must be slipping. I went upstairs and wrote. Today I became invisible enough to become dangerous. He doesn't see the me that's watching. And as I stared out the window into the dusk, I knew the quiet war had begun. I started writing everything down just in case I forgot. There's a strange comfort in a journal. Unlike people, it doesn't interrupt. It doesn't second-guess you. And it never tells you you're wrong about your own life. My journal became the only place where my memory was sacred, where my version of reality couldn't be erased. I began writing each morning before Gregory woke up. I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and document the previous day word for word. I recorded everything he said, everything he did, every glance, every correction, every time he told me I was confused or mistaken. And it didn't stop with writing. I began organizing, categorizing. I created a hidden binder filled with printed emails, transcripts of voice recordings, and time-stamped notes. I numbered the pages, cross-referenced conversations, and indexed it all by topic. Gaslighting, isolation, financial control, false medical claims. It read like a case file, because that's what it was. Gregory's control had evolved slowly, drip by drip, like a leak in the ceiling you don't notice until the plaster caves in. But now I was building the scaffolding to hold the house up, to expose the damage and repair it on my terms. One night, I heard Gregory on the phone again. I was standing just outside his door, recorder in hand, my steps feathered with caution. She's getting worse, he said. I'm telling you, sometimes she just zones out completely. And then she insists she never said what she said. I'm worried about dementia. I'm keeping logs. I've started recording her a bit too, just in case. That last line made my blood run cold. He was recording me. No, I realized. He was pretending to. He was planting seeds again, laying groundwork, creating credibility. I smiled to myself. Let him think he was the only one building a case. Later that week, I printed a new entry from my journal and folded it into a thank you card addressed to Marjorie Lane, my attorney. Inside it, I tucked a flash drive with selected audio clips. Then I mailed it. The next day, I received a confirmation email. Received. Safe. Keep going. You're doing brilliantly. That message gave me more energy than sleep ever could. From then on, I became an archivist of my own life. I began practicing neutral facial expressions in the mirror so he wouldn't suspect when I was recording. I learned to nod at his lies as if I believed them. I let him think I was slipping even as I was sharpening. It was exhausting, like living in a two-person play where I was the only one who knew it was a performance. But I had learned to let silence speak. Like the day I forgot to take my afternoon pills. I left them on the tray untouched. Gregory noticed immediately. Mom, he scolded. You forgot again. I looked at him blankly. I thought I already took them. He sighed. You really didn't. I'm going to have to start setting alarms. And then he added just loud enough. We might need to talk to Dr. Henson again, just to be safe. I wrote it down. Later, when I was alone, I opened the pill case. The capsules looked different, slightly darker, coated. I didn't know what they were, so I packed them into a small Ziploc bag and brought them to a friend from the support group, a retired nurse named Leah. She met me at the cafe 2 towns over where Gregory wouldn't find me. She looked at the pills, then looked at me. Celeste, she said, he's giving you low-dose antipsychotics. These aren't blood pressure meds. They're often used in care homes to make patients docile. My stomach turned. He's drugging you, she said softly. That's chemical restraint. I couldn't speak. My throat burned. I had suspected control. I had proven manipulation. But this was assault. When I got home that night, Gregory greeted me with his usual syrupy charm. "Hey, did you get your yarn?" I smiled. Yes. They had the soft lavender I like. He didn't know I'd just returned from reporting his behavior confidentially to a local elder care watchdog organization. He didn't know I now had a nurse on record confirming the misuse of medication. He didn't know my silence was no longer submission. It was strategy. I wrote in my journal that night in bold ink. He's no longer just controlling me. He's drugging me. And now I'm not documenting for clarity. I'm documenting for war. That was the night I stopped being afraid of him. Not because I thought I could win, but because I knew I would never let him win without showing the world exactly who he was. He said he'd never leave me, so why did I feel so alone? "You'll never be alone, Mom. I'll always be here to take care of you." That's what Gregory said the day he moved in 2 years after my husband died. He said it while carrying a box of framed photos into the guest room, smiling like the golden son everyone believed he was. It sounded like a promise, but I now know it was a sentence. Gregory didn't mean "I'll be here when you need me." He meant "You'll be where I put you." And slowly that became everywhere I turned. He filled the house with himself, his music in the background, his groceries in the fridge, his fitness equipment in the den. Every room carried his scent, his noise, his rhythm. The entire home hummed with his presence. But beneath it all was this terrible quiet. The kind of quiet where you tiptoe in your own kitchen, where you rehearse what you're going to say before you speak, just to avoid being corrected. Where you feel your body shrink whenever someone asks, "How's Gregory doing?" And you lie through your teeth. He's a blessing. I wasn't alone in the technical sense. Gregory was always there, hovering, answering the door before I could reach it, screening my calls, asking if I really wanted to wear that before dinner with family, sitting down beside me before I'd even pulled out my chair. And yet I had never felt so profoundly, heartbreakingly alone. I remember sitting on the patio one evening watching the sunset alone for the first time in weeks. He had gone out for a run. I had 27 minutes. I counted them like stolen coins. I looked at the sky flushed in soft orange and whispered aloud, "Where did I go?" The breeze answered, not with a sound, but with a feeling. "You're still here," buried beneath him, but still here. I clung to that thought, because the hardest part of psychological abuse isn't the manipulation, it's the erasure, the slow grinding down of your will until you don't even know whether the words you speak are your own. One morning, I sat at the breakfast table and said nothing. Gregory noticed right away. "No crossword puzzle today?" he asked. "No tea." I shook my head. He frowned. "You sure you're okay? You're really not yourself lately." And there it was again. That phrase, "not yourself," as if my silence was proof of decline. As if my stillness validated his version of me. But in truth, I was finally watching him. Observing the patterns without reacting. Like watching an actor rehearse a monologue he didn't realize was being recorded. That day, he left his phone on the kitchen counter while taking a shower. I saw the name Dr. Henson on the screen. He'd sent her a message. "She's definitely getting worse. Had to help her dress again today. She forgot how to use the kettle." I had dressed myself. I had boiled my own tea. He was building a fortress of lies around me, one text at a time. I took a photo of the message with my secret phone. Later that day, I went to the library. The old librarian Sandra still remembered me. "Celeste Marwood. It's been too long." "It has," I said with a smile that felt real for the first time in weeks. "I need a quiet corner." And maybe something about gaslighting. She blinked, then led me to the psychology aisle. I read for 3 hours, annotated, took photos of passages. Gaslighting is not always about making you believe you're crazy. It's about making others think you are until no one listens when you speak. That line stayed with me. On the walk home, I passed by the church where I used to sing in the choir. My throat tightened. I hadn't sung in almost a year. I walked inside. The organist was practicing. The room was empty. I sat in the back pew, folded my hands in my lap, and breathed in the silence. Not the silence of control, the silence of sanctuary. That's when it happened. I wept. Not the loud, dramatic sobbing people associate with grief, but the quiet, exhausted kind. The kind that leaks out when you've been strong for too long and the strength begins to rot inside you. I left the church with red eyes and a steel spine. That night, I called Leah, the nurse from the support group, and told her everything. She didn't hesitate. Celeste, listen to me. You are not broken. He's trying to make you look broken. There's a difference. And the fact that you're documenting all of this means you're stronger than most. Her words were a balm. That night, I stood in front of the mirror. Gregory had gone to sleep early. I looked into my own eyes and said softly, "You are not gone." Then I wrote in my journal, "He said he'd never leave me, but I've never felt more abandoned. Because being watched is not the same as being loved." And then, on a new page in large letters, I wrote, "Tomorrow I lie, and the lie will set me free." My first lie to him was my first taste of freedom. The next morning, I told Gregory I was going to the market. He smiled over his coffee, suspicious but civil. "Want me to come with you?" "No," I said brightly. "I'm just getting yarn." He nodded. "All right, but take your phone, and don't forget your list. Remember what happened last time?" Of course I remembered. There had been no last time. Just another fabricated story told to remind me I was forgetful, unreliable. This time, though, I wasn't going to the market. I was going to the support group. It was held discreetly in a room behind the community center. Just a circle of chairs, a table with water bottles, and women who looked like grandmothers but carried eyes like soldiers. There was no judgment, only silence and then slow, careful words. "I'm Celeste," I said, sitting down. "I live with my son. He's supposed to be helping me." No one flinched. A few nodded. "What does help look like?" someone asked gently. I laughed. Not out of humor, but exhaustion. "It looks like not having keys to your own house," I said. "Like being told what your own feelings are. Like forgetting what your own voice sounds like because someone else is always narrating your life." They understood. I told them everything. The journal, the medication, the fake appointments, the recordings. One woman, Judith, reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're still in there," she said. "That's all that matters." Another woman, Linda, shared something I'll never forget. "My husband used to tell me I couldn't handle bad news, so he'd hide things from me to protect me. When I found out it wasn't just betrayal, it was infantilization, emotional imprisonment." Those two words, emotional imprisonment. That was exactly what I was living. "We stayed for 2 hours. I cried. I laughed once. I made copies of their resource sheet and saved the helpline into my secret phone. When I got back home, Gregory was at the door before I'd even pulled out my keys. "Where were you?" he asked, smiling. But his eyes were narrow. "Yarn took longer than I thought," I said. "The colors were hard to choose." He kissed my forehead. "Next time, let me drive you. It's safer." I smiled. That night, I wrote, "Today I lied. I left. I met women who saw me. He thinks I'm unraveling, but I am weaving something stronger than fear." The next lie came the following week. "I signed up for a knitting workshop," I told him. He frowned. "That might be too much for you. What if you get tired halfway?" "I'll manage," I said. "They have benches." That day, I met with Leah again. She gave me a burner phone, showed me how to store documents securely in the cloud, and gave me the name of a therapist who worked specifically with elder survivors of emotional abuse. "Don't underestimate your trauma," Leah warned. "Just because he hasn't hit you doesn't mean your nervous system isn't in survival mode." That night, Gregory commented that I seemed more alert lately. "That's great, Mom. Maybe the meds are helping." I stared at him across the table. Maybe. He didn't know I'd stopped taking them 2 weeks ago. That's when the third lie came. It was bolder. "I think you're right," I said one morning. "About the memory stuff. Maybe I am slipping a bit." His face lit up softly, subtly, like a con artist sensing the mark was folding. "That's okay, Mom," he said. "We'll get through this together." I've already started researching assisted living communities. There it was. The beginning of the end. I asked him to show me. He pulled out pamphlets. Tabs opened on his iPad. Listings with phrases like memory support and decline dignity plans. I nodded as he talked. I even complimented his thoroughness. And while he was upstairs that evening, I scanned every document, saved every link, and recorded his entire pitch on my hidden phone. He was planning to put me away. Quietly, permanently. But I was planning too. I began curating an exhibit, my private dossier of evidence. I started labeling audio files, transcribing calls, saving everything on an external drive hidden behind the baseboard under my vanity. I titled the folder, Truth. Then came the final lie, one that sealed his confidence. Could you help me with some of my prescriptions? I asked him one evening. It's just so hard to remember sometimes. He smiled like a man who'd won. Of course, Mom. That's what I'm here for. He had no idea what I was really remembering. What I was recording, what I was preparing, what I was about to reveal. I wasn't just leaving breadcrumbs anymore. I was building the exit and lighting the fuse. I played the role of the forgetful old woman, and he never noticed I was listening. There's a strange power in being underestimated. The more I acted confused, the more relaxed Gregory became. He'd sigh when I asked him to repeat things. He'd raise his voice slowly, as if I were going deaf. He even started patting my hand in that syrupy, condescending way people use on toddlers. He didn't realize he was giving me exactly what I needed: space to observe, to collect, to build the truth in silence. I became a master of the blank stare. I let my eyes drift at the right moments. When he told his friends she's having those days again, I smiled absently and said, "Oh dear, am I?" He never noticed the recorder in my cardigan pocket. That's the thing about emotional manipulators. They get drunk on their own performance. Gregory was so convinced of my decline, he stopped paying attention to how sharply I was watching him. And I watched everything. I watched him log into my bank account from his tablet. I watched him take a call from a real estate agent and say, "She'll be moving soon, so we can probably start the listing next month." I watched him delete my voicemails and messages from people I hadn't even realized were still trying to reach me. He didn't know I had synced the phone's cloud history to a secret backup. He didn't know I had taken screenshots. He didn't know I recorded the phone call where he described me to a lawyer as mentally diminishing and used the phrase, possible early onset. But most of all, he didn't know I was documenting him. One day I dropped a cup on purpose, let it shatter on the tile floor. "Oh no," I whispered, holding my hand to my chest. He came running in, breathless with concern. "You scared me," he said. "Are you okay?" "I think so," I replied, dazed. He knelt beside me and started picking up the shards. "You're just not as steady these days. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Henson about a home nurse." I didn't respond. But later I played back the audio and transcribed it word for word. Then I added the file to the folder titled Performance Notes. The Good Son. I began naming each file like chapters in a play. Act I, The Gentle Gatekeeper. Act 2, The Expert Witness to a Decline That Never Existed. Act 3, The Savior, Preparing the Exit Strategy. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was curating it like a story. My story. One night, I pretended to fall asleep on the couch. I let my head nod forward and my breath slow. Gregory stood by the stairs watching me for a long time. Then he made a phone call. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just listened. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think this is it. I've got enough. Between the doctor notes and her behavior, I'm going to push for guardianship this month. After that, yeah, we can move forward with the sale." Pause. "No, she won't fight it. She barely remembers what day it is." I smiled. Not with joy, but with certainty. You see, that call was the last scene I needed. I already had the medical email, the fake updates to my will, the doctored stories to friends and family. And now I had the final motive. He wanted to sell my home. The home I built with my husband. The home filled with the life I was still living. The next morning, I made a quiet visit to my niece Natalie, the one Gregory had told me was too busy to bother. She opened the door and gasped. "Aunt Celeste." Her hug nearly broke me. We sat on her patio drinking coffee in mismatched mugs, and I told her everything. I showed her the drive, played her one recording, and watched her face pale. "He's lying to everyone," she whispered. I nodded. "And soon everyone will know." She offered to host a family gathering. "We'll make it look like a casual lunch," she said. "You'll have the floor." I left that day feeling lighter than I had in months. That night, Gregory noticed my glow. "You seem chipper," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Did something good happen?" I smiled. "I found some old letters from your father. They reminded me who I used to be." He grinned. "Must have been nice having someone to look after you." Oh, I said, leaning in ever so slightly. He never had to. He chuckled, not catching the edge in my voice. But I caught something in his overconfidence. He believed he had already won. He believed his story was airtight. He believed I was disappearing. But in truth, I had never been more present. I wrote in my journal, I am not fading. I am waiting. And soon the curtain will rise. I heard what he told my niece, and it broke me. Natalie had always been the sharp one. Quick with wit, gentle with truth, and the only person in the family who could make Gregory lower his voice and choose his words carefully. So I trusted her when she agreed to help. She said she'd start checking in more often, even casually talk to Gregory to see what he was spinning behind my back. But I wasn't prepared for what she would find. It was a quiet Tuesday when she called me, her voice barely above a whisper. Aunt Celeste, I think you should hear this. She sent an audio file. I opened it, and I listened. Gregory's voice came through, first relaxed, affable, almost charming. It was a recording of him on Natalie's speakerphone, casually chatting. She's declining fast, he said. Still thinks she's fine, of course. That's common. But between you and me, it's just a matter of time. I've already spoken with her doctor and a lawyer. We'll be moving toward guardianship soon. I just need the rest of the family on board. Natalie said nothing. Gregory continued. She's starting to imagine things. Said she found a photo in the garage I'd never seen. Keeps a journal too, but I think it's mostly fiction. She writes stories like they're real memories. Pretty sad, really. I froze. My journal, my lifeline. He had read it. He had found it. He had dismissed it as fiction. I paused, the audio, hands shaking. Natalie's voice followed, soft and angry. Celeste, I am so sorry. I didn't know it was this bad. I couldn't reply. Not yet. I sat in the dark for what felt like hours, the tea in my cup going cold, the world suddenly too heavy to stand under. He had broken into the one place that was mine. He had read my truth and called it fiction. He had told the one person I trusted that I was slipping like a polite obituary spoken before death had even arrived. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the precision. Gregory knew exactly how to discredit me. He'd always been careful with his language. Never cruel, never loud, never reckless. Everything was said in soft tones wrapped in concern, sealed with, I'm just doing what's best for her. That's what made him so dangerous. He wasn't a monster. He was a martyr in disguise. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I typed instead. I created a new document, titled it, The File of Record. I transcribed everything from memory that he had ever said to discredit me, every gaslight, every subtle undermining, every time he'd corrected my story in front of others. I paired each entry with audio timestamps and documents. I labeled that section, Language of Control. Then I made a second folder, Voice of Me. Inside it, I recorded a video of myself. Just me speaking to the camera. Today is March 9th. My name is Celeste Marwood. I am 74 years old. I am not confused. I am not forgetful. I am aware, and I am recording this because I fear the person I live with is planning to remove my autonomy under false pretenses. I kept my voice steady. I have been documenting incidents of manipulation, isolation, and unauthorized access to my medical and financial information. If this video is being played for anyone, know this. I was not broken. I was being broken. I stared into the lens. Then I smiled. He thinks I'm lost, but I've never been more certain of who I am. I ended the video, saved it, encrypted it, and uploaded it to a cloud folder shared with my lawyer, my niece, and quietly, my old friend, Martha, who had reached out again just a week earlier. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen. Gregory was at the stove making eggs. Sleep well? He asked without turning around. Fine, I said, opening the cupboard. I was thinking, he added, we should start looking into that place in Ashfield. The Memory Care Center, just in case. I turned to face him. Sounds lovely, I said with a sweet smile. Do they take sons too? He laughed nervously. I laughed too. Only one of us meant it. That afternoon, Natalie called again. We need to move fast, she said. He's gathering signatures from the family. He says it's preventative. Says he just wants what's best. Let him gather, I said. Let him write the play. I looked at my notebook where the plan was nearly complete. Because I've got the ending. That night, I wrote, he saw my truth and called it fiction. But this story is mine, and I'm about to read it aloud. The support group taught me what abuse without bruises looks like. It's a peculiar kind of pain when you realize no one will believe you because you're too functional to be pitied and too old to be taken seriously. That was exactly the kind of pain every woman in that circle knew. And it was why every Tuesday morning at precisely 10:05, I sat quietly in that folding chair surrounded by women with the same kind of tired smile I saw in my own mirror. We were not victims in the traditional sense. There were no broken bones, no restraining orders, no violent outbursts. But the wounds. Oh, the wounds ran deep. We were women who had been silenced, not screamed at. We had our decisions questioned, our voices corrected. Our autonomy slowly dissolved into warm smiles and weaponized concern. The leader of our group, a sharp-eyed woman named Ellen, was a retired therapist in her late 60s. She had once said, "The difference between care and control is choice. If you're not allowed to say no, you're not being cared for. You're being kept." That sentence lodged itself inside me like a splinter of clarity, because that was the word I'd been avoiding all along. Kept. I wasn't living. I was being kept. That Tuesday, the group focused on covert narcissistic abuse. Ellen wrote the traits on the whiteboard one by one. They appear charming in public. They manipulate through guilt and obligation. They isolate under the guise of protection. They rewrite your reality slowly so you question your own instincts. They never think they're the abuser because they frame everything as care. Every bullet point stabbed me with recognition. I shared Gregory's recent attempt to collect family signatures for guardianship. I told them about the audio files, the journal, the video. Most of all, I shared the deep sense of humiliation, not from what he'd done, but from the fact that I had let it happen for so long. Leah, seated beside me, gently touched my knee. "We all did," she said, "because we believed they loved us, because we wanted to believe they were right, that we were just tired, or emotional, or forgetful." Judith added, "That's how it works. If they smacked us in the face, we'd leave. But when they erase you slowly day by day, you don't notice until you're just a whisper of yourself." I sat there in silence, letting their words wash over me like medicine. They weren't just telling my story. They were helping me rewrite the ending. After the session, Ellen pulled me aside. "Celeste," she said, "you have something powerful. A paper trail, recordings, and a support system. Do you know how rare that is?" I nodded. She lowered her voice. "So here's what you do. You don't confront him until you're in a room full of witnesses. You play the part a little longer, because when you reveal this, it needs to be undeniable." She handed me a folder. Inside was a formal checklist, abuse documentation for legal protection. I took it home and added it to my growing archive. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat at the old piano, my fingers stiff but still remembering the notes. I played Debussy's Clair de Lune, slowly, imperfectly. Gregory stood in the doorway, puzzled. "You okay, Mom?" "I'm remembering," I said without looking up. He smiled. "That's great. You've been doing better lately." I paused mid-chord and turned to him. Maybe I never got worse. He blinked, the edges of his smile flickering. Then he walked away. I finished the piece and closed the piano. My fingers trembled, but not from age, from anticipation. I opened my journal and wrote, "The bruises are on the inside, on my memory, my dignity, but they are real, and I have named them." Then I drafted the guest list. It was time for a family gathering, one that would change everything. I gathered the receipts, then made the guest list. There's something deeply ceremonial about preparing for war when you've spent your whole life keeping the peace. I didn't move with rage. I moved with clarity, with deliberation, with the stillness of a woman who had been pushed far past the edge and found somehow that the fall had taught her to fly. The plan had already begun to take form during my last support group meeting. But now, with the weight of recordings, transcripts, emails, and corroborating testimony behind me, it was time to give it structure. I started with a list of names, Family members, close friends, people Gregory had kept just far enough away so they only saw what he showed them. Natalie, of course, was the first. Then Martha, my cousin Helen, my late husband's brother Thomas, even Aunt Jean, who Gregory had claimed was too ill to visit. I found her number buried in the back of an old address book. She was perfectly well, and more than curious. All of them had been quietly distanced from me over the last year. All of them had unknowingly been fed the same story. Celeste is slipping. Celeste forgets. Celeste is vulnerable. So I decided to give them a different story. The true one. I didn't tell Gregory I was planning a family lunch. Natalie and I arranged everything under the pretense that she just wanted to see everyone again. We used her home as the venue-neutral territory outside of Gregory's walls of control. I offered to help with the cooking. Gregory didn't even blink. If you want to bake something, just make sure it's something soft, he said casually. You know how people your age sometimes forget the oven? I smiled. Of course. That night I baked 3 pies from scratch, just to remind myself that I hadn't forgotten a damn thing. The next day, I opened the folder labeled Receipts. I reviewed every entry, every printed email, every transcript of phone calls with medical offices, attorneys, real estate agents, every clipped voicemail, every time-stamped conversation where Gregory corrected, dismissed, and distorted me. I organized them into categories: medical manipulation, financial interference, gaslighting statements, fabricated memory loss, unauthorized legal action, social isolation tactics. Each category had a cover sheet, bulleted points, supporting documents. I wanted it to be undeniable, unshakable, the kind of thing even Gregory couldn't smile his way out of. I made 6 copies of the file, 1 for me, 1 for Natalie, 1 for my lawyer, 3 more for the people who would need them most when this story came to light. Then I prepared the visual evidence, the photographs, the screenshots, the image of my wedding photo face down in a box labeled junk. I printed everything on glossy paper, arranged them into a binder titled simply, What You Didn't See. I placed it on top of the pile, a silent preface to the truth. Then I rehearsed. Not a speech, nothing that formal, just truths, lined up in sequence. I practiced saying phrases like, I'm not declining. I've been documenting. You didn't hear from me because he didn't let you. I didn't forget. I was made to feel like I had. This is what emotional abuse looks like when the bruises are invisible. Every time I stumbled, I went back and said it again. I needed to be solid. Not perfect, but anchored. Because the moment I stood in that room and peeled back the mask Gregory wore, I knew he would fight like a cornered animal. And I had to be ready. That night, I told Gregory I was looking forward to the gathering. He chuckled. You'll probably forget half of them, he said with a wink. I leaned in close, kissed his cheek, and whispered, Funny, I was just thinking how unforgettable this day will be. He smiled, not realizing I wasn't joking. The next morning, I pulled out my late husband's favorite brooch, a small silver leaf, and pinned it to my blouse. Not because I needed armor, but because I needed to remember. I had been loved honestly once, and I was about to defend that version of myself, the woman he had seen clearly. Not this shadow Gregory tried to create. I wrote in my journal before leaving, Today I carry the truth in a manila envelope. I wear my voice like a shield, and when the story changes, it will be because I changed it. I looked in the mirror. I didn't see a victim. I didn't see a confused old woman. I didn't see someone fading. I saw fire. Quiet, controlled, but unflinching. And I knew he has no idea what's coming. The day of the gathering. He thought it was for him. Gregory ironed his shirt the morning of the lunch, like he was dressing for his coronation. Do you think I should wear the blue or the white? He asked me, holding both up like a boy on his first day of school. I looked him in the eye. The white, I said. It'll look better when the light hits you. He smiled. You think I'll be the center of attention? I tilted my head. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He laughed, folding the blue one away. It's going to be good for you, Mom. Seeing everyone again. Yes, it was going to be very good for me. The drive to Natalie's was quiet. I stared out the window while Gregory hummed along to some upbeat podcast, probably about productivity or real estate. He always liked to keep his mind sharp even as he worked tirelessly to dull mine. When we arrived, the house was already buzzing with the polite chaos of family chatter. Coats were being hung, dishes were passed into the kitchen, air kisses and handshakes were exchanged. Gregory did his usual rounds, smiling wide, laying down compliments like breadcrumbs, soaking in the admiration of people who still believed he was the son every aging parent dreamed of. "Oh, he's just such a blessing," I heard Aunt Jean whisper to Thomas. "She's lucky to have him." Lucky. I smiled to myself. Let them have this moment, because it wouldn't last long. Natalie guided me to the sitting room where a long table had been set. Each place had a folded card with names, and in the center between the cutlery and flowers were two neat stacks of brown manila envelopes. Gregory didn't notice them at first. He was busy charming Helen about his new work-from-home project. But when he finally spotted the folders, his brow furrowed. "Are we doing some kind of game?" he asked with a grin, sitting next to me. "No game," I said, my voice calm. "Just something I've been working on." The room quieted as everyone took their seats. Natalie cleared her throat. "Before we eat, my aunt has something she'd like to share." Gregory looked at me and laughed. "Mom, you didn't prepare a speech, did you?" I reached down and placed the recorder on the table. Then I slid one of the envelopes in front of him. "No," I said. "But I'd like you to listen." I pressed play, and the room went still. His voice came through first calm, measured, deceptive. "I'm telling you, she's slipping. It's early stages, but I've already got the paperwork lined up." Then my voice. Clear, lucid, unbroken. "Today is March 9th. My name is Celeste Marwood. I am 74 years old. I am not confused. I am not forgetful." Gasps followed. Chairs creaked. Someone dropped a fork. I opened the envelope in front of me and pulled out the binder titled, "What You Didn't See." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply passed the evidence around the table. Emails, texts, photos, recordings, affidavits, confirmation from Leah and Marjorie, dates, times, patterns, all in black and white, all irrefutable. Gregory tried to interrupt once, twice, but no one looked at him. Not anymore. They were looking at me. And what they saw was not a woman unraveling. They saw someone who had been unraveled and had sewn herself back together, one receipt at a time. "What is this?" he finally demanded. "You've been spying on me." "No," I replied. "I've been surviving you." Thomas stood up first. "Is this real?" he asked, holding up one of the printed transcripts. "Yes," I said. Then Natalie. "She's been documenting everything for months. I've heard it. I've seen it." Gregory stood too, his chair scraping violently. "You're turning them against me." "No," I said softly. "You did that yourself." He looked around the table, frantic now, the mask slipping, but there were no sympathetic eyes left, only stunned silence. He turned back to me, voice rising. "Why would you do this to me?" The silence cracked, and I answered loud enough for every person in the room to hear. "Because you were doing it to me. Every single day." He stormed out. No coat, no goodbye, just the sound of the door slamming behind him. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Aunt Jean whispered, "Oh my God." Natalie passed out tissues. Martha reached across the table and held my hand. "I had no idea," she said. I nodded. That was the point. We didn't eat lunch right away. First, they sat and listened, really listened, to the rest of the recordings, to the timeline, to my words. By the end, no one asked if I was sure. No one suggested that maybe Gregory meant well. No one told me I was lucky anymore. I had reclaimed my voice. And the truth had done what silence never could. It revealed the abuser dressed in white. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom with my journal. I opened to a new page. He thought the gathering was about him. And in a way, it was because now everyone knows who he is. And more importantly, they know who I still am. I pressed play and silence fell across the table. There is a silence more deafening than any scream. It happens when people realize they've misjudged someone. When the mask falls and what lies beneath is so grotesque it robs them of speech. That was the silence that filled Natalie's dining room the moment Gregory's voice echoed from the recorder. "We'll move forward with guardianship soon. She doesn't even remember how to use the stove." Click. Then came my voice. Calm, firm, unwavering. This is Celeste Marwood. I am 74 years old. I am not confused. I am not forgetful. I am documenting everything because I fear my son is creating a false narrative about my mental state. I pressed pause. No one moved. No one exhaled. All those polite conversations, all the times they nodded along when Gregory said, "She's just been off lately," they came crashing down in that instant. Thomas was the first to speak. I thought you'd just been distant." "I wasn't," I said softly. "I was being disappeared." Natalie handed out the folders one by one. "Inside you'll find documentation," she said, her voice steady but cold. Emails from Gregory to Celeste's lawyer trying to revoke her representation. Text messages to real estate agents claiming she'd soon be moved to a care facility. Financial transactions made without her consent. Gregory had left the house 10 minutes earlier. The space he left behind still reeked of pretense. Martha opened her folder and gasped. "He told me you didn't remember who I was anymore." I nodded. "And you believed him?" Her eyes welled with tears. "I'm so sorry." "I understand," I said. "I wanted to believe him too." I took out the binder titled, "What You Didn't See," and laid it flat in the center of the table. Then, with a calm I didn't know I had, I flipped to the pages marked gaslighting. There were quotes, transcripts, timestamps, snapshots. Each one showed a pattern so clear, so calculated no one could deny it anymore. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" asked Aunt Jean. "I tried," I said. "He intercepted the calls, blocked the texts, controlled the narrative." "And the doctor?" asked Thomas. "What did she say?" "She only ever heard his version of me," I replied, "until I sent her the recordings. Then she apologized in writing." Natalie passed around the printed email. The doctor's statement was brief, but damning. "I regret accepting Gregory Marwood's assessment of his mother without direct and thorough examination. Celeste Marwood has demonstrated no observable cognitive decline and presents as mentally and emotionally sound." The silence deepened. But this time it wasn't disbelief. It was awakening. "You were right, all along," Martha whispered. "I didn't need to be right," I said. "I needed to be believed." I stood up, not shakily, not timidly, but firmly. And I did something I hadn't done in a long, long time. I read aloud from my journal. He erased my voice a sentence at a time, but I wrote each one back. Every day I gave myself proof that I still existed, that I remembered, that I knew. And now so do all of you. I looked around the room, at the eyes that once looked through me, now filled with recognition and shame. "None of this was loud," I said. "Not the lies, not the isolation, not the way he rearranged my world until I couldn't tell what was mine. But now, this story belongs to me again. And I'm sharing it not to punish him, but to remind you what subtle cruelty looks like." Natalie brought over the small voice recorder. "Play the second clip," I said. She pressed the button. It was Gregory again, bragging to a friend. "She probably won't even notice the house listing until it's already done. Honestly, I don't think she'd understand the paperwork anyway." That was all it took. Thomas stood up. "I'm calling our family attorney. This isn't just elder abuse. This is financial fraud." Aunt Jean followed. "I want nothing more to do with him." And Martha, tears still in her eyes, stood up and hugged me fiercely. "You are not invisible anymore." I cried then, just a little, quietly. The kind of tears that wash the fog off the mirror and let you see yourself again. We didn't eat for another hour. First we wrote statements, signed letters, called people, made plans. By the end of the afternoon, I wasn't just a woman reclaiming her voice. I was a woman leading a movement, one that started in my own home but would ripple into theirs. Before I left, Natalie placed her hand over mine. "You know what I think," she said. "What?" "You weren't just fighting Gregory. You were fighting silence. And you won." That night, I went home to a house that still had his scent in the couch cushions and his fingerprints on the doorknobs. But he wasn't there, and I didn't feel alone. I sat by the window and wrote. I pressed play, and the silence that followed wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to him, to every word he thought would never be heard. And now, it's his turn to be quiet. He stormed out, but I stayed standing. Gregory didn't come back that night, or the night after. In fact, he never returned to the house again. He sent a single email, curt, defensive, and utterly devoid of apology. Mom, I don't know what kind of story you've spun, but I'm not going to be the villain in your little drama. I did everything for you. If you want to throw that away, fine. Just know you'll regret it when you actually need me. Gregory. No apology, no remorse, not even a hint of doubt in his righteousness. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed my laptop. That email was the final scene in a play I never auditioned for, but had been forced to star in. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was free. That weekend, Natalie and Thomas helped me change the locks. We reviewed the legal paperwork, updated my will, reinstated Marjorie as my attorney, and signed letters revoking any previous power of attorney documents Gregory had touched. The process felt like a slow exorcism. Room by room, I walked through the house and reclaimed it. I took down the caregiver schedules he had taped to the fridge. I removed the pill organizer from the kitchen drawer. Every capsule he had pre-counted now felt like a threat I had survived. I even found my old wedding album tucked behind the water heater, face down in dust. I cleaned it page by page, letting the memories flood in. There I was, in Paris, 1974, laughing in the rain, on our porch swing, cradling Gregory as a baby, holding a copy of Pride and Prejudice, my thumb tucked between pages. None of those images looked like the woman he had tried to convince the world I'd become. Because that woman didn't exist. She never had. That Sunday, I returned to the support group. They clapped when I walked in. I blushed like a schoolgirl. Leah hugged me. We heard she said, "He's gone." Gone, I echoed. But not erased. That's what matters. Ellen, the therapist, beamed. You reclaimed the narrative, Celeste. You made the invisible visible. Do you know how rare that is? I nodded. Yes, but now I know it's possible. After the session, one of the newer women, Judith, pulled me aside. How did you know when it was time? She asked. I thought for a long moment. I didn't, I said, but I knew I couldn't wait for permission. The truth isn't something you whisper when it's convenient. It's something you stand in, even if your legs shake. That night, I hosted my own gathering. Just a few friends. Tea and pie. No files, no recordings, only presence. We sat on the patio and talked about books and travel and music, about memories that were ours, not stories someone else had written for us. I laughed until I cried, and cried until I laughed again. After everyone left, I stood in the center of my living room, barefoot, unafraid. There was no echo of him anymore, no shadow at the edge of the room, just the woman he tried to erase still standing. Stronger, sharper, still here. I went upstairs, pulled out my journal, and wrote the final entry. He stormed out, but I stayed standing. And now the house echoes only with my truth. He made me question myself, so I answered with facts. He made me feel small, so I stood up in front of everyone. He made me silent, so I pressed play. And now, even in his absence, I am louder than ever. I want you to remember something. Not every abuser leaves bruises. Some of them bring you tea, drive you to appointments, call you sweetheart in front of strangers. They smile at your friends, use words like safety care decline, and slowly they rewrite your story until even you can't tell which chapters are real. But here's the truth. If you feel like you're disappearing, you probably are. And if someone says they love you while muting your voice, that is not love. It takes enormous strength to stand up after being pushed down with politeness. It takes even more to document it, to name it, to speak it out loud. But when you do, when you reclaim the pen, the world listens. And silence becomes something sacred again. Not a weapon, a witness. I am Celeste Marwood, and I am not confused. I am not declining. I am not gone. I am the author of my life, and I am still writing.